The afternoon sun poured through the large windows of the suburban clubhouse, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. The air was tense, almost suffocating, as homeowners filed in for the monthly HOA meeting. Some whispered in corners, others clutched their coffee cups like shields. But all eyes seemed to eventually settle on Marcus Williams, sitting quietly near the back, his posture calm but his gaze unwavering. Marcus wasn't just another homeowner. For years, he had endured the HOA's relentless scrutiny, fines, and public humiliation. Every violation had been a trap, every letter a subtle threat. And yet, here he was, the only black homeowner in this affluent neighborhood, sitting silently as the clock inched toward 3 p.m. At the front of the room sat Thomas Hargrove, the HOA president, his smug smile nearly as bright as the sunlight streaming through the windows. He tapped his gavel impatiently, drawing the room to silence. Beside him, Linda Carter, the board secretary, flipped through a stack of papers, her eyes darting nervously between Marcus and Hargrove. The tension was palpable. The meeting began like any other, but Marcus felt an undercurrent of anticipation, a quiet thrill that something was about to happen. He wasn't just here to sit quietly, he was here to expose years of corruption and abuse. Homes in violation of community guidelines will face fines effective immediately, Hargrove announced, his voice dripping with authority. He scanned the room until it rested on Marcus. "Mr. Williams, your landscaping continues to fall below HOA standards. We expect compliance by the end of the week." Marcus didn't flinch. He had been expecting this. He leaned back in his chair, eyes steady, a faint smirk forming. Across the room, his neighbor and close friend, Tanya, whispered from the row beside him, "Don't let them intimidate you, Marcus. They're finally going to pay for this." Hargrove smirked, mistaking Marcus's calm for weakness. "And as for repeated violations, the board will consider further action," he added, tapping the gavel. The sound echoed ominously in the room. "Anyone wishing to speak against the board may do so now." Marcus slowly rose from his seat. Every eye followed him, some skeptical, others curious. He took a deep breath, letting the silence stretch for several heartbeats. Then he began to speak. "For years, I have received letters, fines, and threats that never applied to anyone else in this neighborhood," Marcus said, his voice steady, carrying the weight of every injustice he had endured. "I have been targeted for my property, my choices, even my presence here. And today, I will show you proof of the corruption that has been happening behind closed doors." Gasps rippled through the room. Hargrove's smug smile faltered. Linda Carter's hands trembled as she shuffled papers nervously. Marcus reached into his bag and pulled out a small speaker, connecting it to his phone. "Listen carefully," he said, pressing play. A voice filled the room, the unmistakable voice of Hargrove, recorded months earlier, making racist comments, demanding bribes, and instructing other board members to fabricate violations against Marcus. The room went silent. The officers of the HOA looked down, their faces pale. Some homeowners murmured, others gasped audibly. Hargrove's face went from disbelief to fury in seconds. "This is impossible," he shouted, banging the gavel. "You can't prove." Before he could finish, the door at the far end of the clubhouse creaked open. Two uniformed police officers stepped inside, their presence immediately commanding attention. Marcus didn't flinch. Tanya's eyes sparkled with quiet triumph, as if she had been expecting this exact moment. The president's mouth opened, then closed, as reality began to sink in. Marcus remained calm, his hands clasped in front of him, letting justice take the first step on its own. The room was frozen for a heartbeat, the echo of Marcus's recording still lingering in the air. Hargrove's face had drained of color, his smug confidence replaced by pure panic. He stammered, searching for control that was no longer his to hold. This isn't real." Hargrove bellowed, banging the gavel so hard it rattled on the table. "I demand that this be stopped immediately." Linda Carter, the board secretary, swallowed hard, her hands trembling. The stack of papers she had been holding now seemed meaningless. She glanced nervously at Hargrove, as if seeking permission or reassurance that he could somehow still regain control. But Hargrove's eyes, once full of arrogance, were wild with fear. Murmurs ran through the room. Some homeowners whispered among themselves, shocked by the revelation. Others stared at Hargrove in disbelief. A few, emboldened by Marcus's courage, began to rise, asking quiet questions, their voices shaky but growing stronger with every second. Marcus remained seated for a moment, letting the tension stretch. Then he stood, his posture calm and deliberate. "Mr. Hargrove," he said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "you spent years targeting me, threatening my property, and attempting to silence me. You thought this neighborhood would never hold you accountable. Today, that changes." Tanya, sitting beside him, gave him a reassuring nod. She had been there from the beginning, quietly supporting him through each unjust fine and inspection. Her presence reminded Marcus that he was not alone, that his fight had meaning beyond himself. Hargrove's eyes darted around, seeking allies. Some board members avoided his gaze, while others looked like they were reconsidering every decision they had made. One older homeowner whispered under her breath, "I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't know it was this bad." The officers in the room, initially quiet, began to approach the front, their presence commanding immediate attention. Hargrove's panic escalated. "I am the president. I have authority here. You can't just..." One of the officers, a tall man with a stern expression, interrupted, "Sir, you are under arrest for multiple counts of corruption, bribery, and harassment." The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Gasps, whispers, and stunned silence collided. Hargrove's mouth opened again, but no words came. He staggered backward, as if the floor had given way beneath him. Meanwhile, Marcus remained composed, standing tall, letting the weight of justice settle over the room. The neighbors who had once quietly observed from the sidelines now watched openly, some nodding in silent approval, others shaking their heads in disbelief at the magnitude of the scandal unfolding before them. Hargrove lunged toward the gavel as if it were a lifeline, but the officer moved with practiced precision, guiding him gently yet firmly toward the door. "You should have thought about the consequences before you spent years bullying a homeowner," Marcus said softly, almost to himself, but loud enough for Hargrove to hear. The room erupted into a controlled chaos. Some homeowners applauded Marcus's bravery, while others simply shook their heads, processing the spectacle. Tanya's hand squeezed Marcus's briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the victory they had fought for together. Even Linda Carter, shaken and embarrassed, seemed to recognize the inevitability of the situation. She had seen Hargrove's arrogance firsthand, and now it had collapsed spectacularly. As the officers led Hargrove out, the room buzzed with whispers and quiet conversations. Marcus finally exhaled, allowing himself a small, satisfied smile. The fight was far from over, there would be paperwork, lawsuits, and rebuilding trust, but the first battle had been decisively won. The afternoon sunlight, streaming through the windows, now seemed less oppressive and more triumphant, casting a warm glow over Marcus and the few who had quietly supported him. The neighborhood had witnessed something rare, justice served in real time, and a black man's courage standing at the center of it all. The clubhouse, once buzzing with tension and whispers, now settled into an uneasy quiet. The officers had led Hargrove out, leaving the board members staring at the empty doorway, their expressions a mixture of shock, fear, and disbelief. For Marcus, it was a brief pause, a moment to catch his breath, though his mind raced with the possibilities this event would set into motion. Linda Carter, the board secretary, let out a shaky sigh. She had always followed Hargrove's lead, afraid of questioning him openly. But now, standing in the aftermath of the arrest, she realized how complicit she had been. She glanced at Marcus, whose calm presence was a stark contrast to the chaos around her. I didn't know it would come to this," she whispered. Marcus nodded, understanding but silent. The fight wasn't over, yet this victory, small as it might seem to outsiders, was monumental. Years of intimidation, fines, and harassment had led to this moment of reckoning. Meanwhile, neighbors had begun trickling in and out of the clubhouse, murmuring to each other, sharing what they had seen and heard. Some were outraged, some were impressed, and a few who had previously ignored the injustices now felt compelled to reconsider their stance. "I knew he was being treated unfairly," one elderly neighbor muttered to another. "It's shocking, but justice, finally, it feels real." Outside, Tanya waited by the entrance, offering Marcus a comforting smile. "You did it," she said softly, though she knew the journey was far from over. Her presence was more than support, it was a reminder of why Marcus had endured the relentless targeting in the first place. It wasn't just about fighting Hargrove, it was about protecting dignity and ensuring the community could no longer be manipulated by corruption. Inside, the remaining board members tried to regain control, but their authority had been fractured. The whispers, the stares, and the undeniable evidence that had just played in front of them left them hesitant. They attempted to continue the meeting, but their voices carried no power. Marcus, seated calmly, observed silently, understanding that control had shifted subtly but irrevocably. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to reflect. The audio evidence had been months in the making, carefully recorded, preserved, and ready for the day when he could no longer remain silent. Each fine, each inspection, each letter had been catalogued meticulously. This wasn't impulsive vengeance, it was strategic, deliberate, and precise. And it had worked. Word of the arrest spread quickly through the neighborhood. Conversations ignited in small groups on lawns, porches, and local cafes. The story of a black homeowner finally standing up to the oppressive HOA president and seeing justice delivered resonated deeply. Marcus knew the media might soon pick it up, but he also knew that real victory wasn't in headlines, it was in setting a precedent. Tanya stayed close, sensing Marcus's mind racing. "People will talk," she said. "Some will support you, some will doubt, but you've done what no one else could." Marcus nodded, letting the weight of that truth settle. For once, he felt seen, not as a target, but as a force that could demand accountability. The afternoon light softened, filtering through the windows, touching Marcus and Tanya. Shadows stretched long across the room, a reminder that while the immediate danger had passed, the work to rebuild trust, ensure justice, and protect the community's integrity was only beginning. Marcus looked at the empty chair where Hargrove had once sat and allowed himself a faint smile. For years, he had been silenced, bullied, and belittled. Today, that ended. The HOA president's arrest was not just a personal victory, it was a message: no one, regardless of power or position, was above accountability. The days after the arrest were a whirlwind. The suburban streets, once quiet and orderly, now buzzed with whispers of scandal, speculation, and vindication. Marcus walked past familiar lawns, nodding at neighbors who had once glanced at him with skepticism, their expressions now a mix of awe and respect. The HOA president's name was on everyone's lips, and the arrest had sparked an unprecedented frenzy. Inside the HOA office, chaos reigned. Emails piled up, phone calls rang incessantly, and board members scrambled to cover themselves. Some blamed Hargrove entirely, while others tried to claim ignorance, but no excuse could mask years of complicity. Marcus, watching from a distance, allowed the storm to unfold naturally. He had anticipated resistance, even backlash, but the law had finally intervened. Tanya, ever present, stood by Marcus's side as he navigated phone calls and interviews. "People are watching, Marcus," she said. "Your courage is inspiring more than you know." Marcus smiled, acknowledging her words, but he remained focused on the broader battle, ensuring this wasn't a one-time spectacle but a lasting change. The police investigation intensified. Officers reviewed recordings, emails, and records that Marcus had meticulously compiled over months. The more evidence surfaced, the clearer it became that Hargrove had orchestrated a campaign of intimidation, discrimination, and financial manipulation. The community, which had largely remained silent out of fear or apathy, now had the proof it needed to confront years of injustice. Inside the clubhouse, the remaining board members attempted a meeting, hoping to regain control. But the energy had shifted irreversibly. Neighbors attended in greater numbers, their faces no longer passive. They demanded transparency, accountability, and answers. The whispers and murmurs had transformed into assertive voices challenging the status quo. Marcus stood at the back, observing. He had no desire to dominate the conversation, his goal had always been simple yet profound: fairness. And as he watched residents question, challenge, and hold the board accountable, he felt the weight of years of silent endurance lift slightly from his shoulders. Even Linda Carter, once timid and fearful, began to find her voice. "We cannot continue as if nothing has happened," she admitted, her hands shaking but her words firm. "This board has failed the community. We must take responsibility." Outside, Tanya caught Marcus's eye. "You see," she whispered. "This is what happens when one person refuses to be silenced." Marcus nodded quietly. The real work wasn't just the arrest, it was creating a lasting impact that would prevent anyone else from being treated the way he had been. As the afternoon sun slanted through the clubhouse windows, casting long golden streaks across the floor, Marcus allowed himself a moment to reflect. For years, he had been targeted, marginalized, and overlooked. Today, he stood as a symbol of resistance, courage, and justice. The road ahead was still fraught with challenges, legal battles, and skepticism, but for the first time, Marcus felt the satisfaction of knowing that change had begun. The neighborhood, once indifferent or complicit, was now awake. Conversations on porches, in driveways, and across backyard fences had shifted. People who had once whispered now spoke openly, acknowledging the injustice and celebrating the courage of one black homeowner who refused to back down. And Marcus, quiet yet resolute, knew this was only the beginning. The afternoon stretched on, sunlight fading slowly into evening, but the sense of empowerment in the community was undeniable. The fight had been personal, yes, but its ripple effects were beginning to transform the entire neighborhood, ensuring that fairness and justice would no longer be optional. The morning sunlight filtered through the clubhouse windows, softer now than the harsh glare of the previous days, but no less revealing. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Residents had gathered once more, not for the usual monthly HOA meeting, but for a hearing called in the wake of Hargrove's arrest. Marcus entered quietly, accompanied by Tanya. Their presence drew subtle nods from neighbors, a silent acknowledgement of the courage it had taken to stand up to years of intimidation. The room buzzed with tension as remaining board members shuffled papers nervously, aware that the community's patience, and trust, had been exhausted. Hargrove was present, seated at the front with officers beside him. His earlier confidence had been replaced by visible unease. Every eye in the room seemed to pierce through him, reminding him that his reign of manipulation and abuse had ended. Linda Carter, now willing to speak her truth, stood and addressed the crowd. "For years, we allowed wrongdoing to go unchecked. Today, we confront it, not just for Marcus, but for every member of this community who deserved fairness and respect." Her voice, trembling at first, grew firmer with each word. The weight of accountability hung in the room like a tangible presence. Marcus remained calm, letting the moment unfold. He knew that true victory wasn't about humiliation, it was about systemic change. And now, with legal authorities present and the community awake, the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. One of the police officers stepped forward. "Thomas Hargrove is formally charged with multiple counts of harassment, discrimination, and corruption related to HOA operations," he announced. The room erupted, some in shock, some in applause. Hargrove's face registered disbelief, the gavel he once wielded now felt meaningless. A neighbor from the back stood, speaking up. "We've watched Marcus endure years of threats and fines. Today, we stand with him. This community will no longer tolerate abuse of power." The words rippled through the room, a chorus of validation that reinforced Marcus's victory. As officers led Hargrove away, Marcus allowed himself a small, triumphant smile. Tanya's hand rested on his shoulder, her eyes reflecting pride and relief. Justice had arrived, not as an abstract concept, but as a real, undeniable moment witnessed by the entire neighborhood. The board members, humbled and chastened, began to discuss new guidelines and accountability measures. Linda Carter offered to oversee reforms, determined to ensure that no other homeowner would experience the same oppression Marcus had endured. The air was different now, charged with hope, accountability, and a sense of possibility. Outside, neighbors exchanged stories and reflections. The sun, now descending into the late afternoon, bathed the streets in a warm glow, symbolic of the change sweeping through the community. For Marcus, the journey had been long, painful, and isolating at times, but it had also been transformative. He had endured the silencing, the unfair scrutiny, and the intimidation, only to emerge as a symbol of courage and justice. Standing on the porch with Tanya and a few supportive neighbors, Marcus finally allowed himself to reflect. "It's not just about me," he said quietly. "It's about ensuring no one else suffers like this again." Tanya smiled, squeezing his hand. "And you've made that real." Today, everyone saw it. As the HOA clubhouse emptied, the sunlight lingered on Marcus's face, warm and unyielding. The battle had been fought, the villain held accountable, and the community transformed. The story of one black homeowner's courage would resonate for years to come, a reminder that silence is optional, but bravery is contagious. The afternoon had turned to evening, but the sense of justice, respect, and renewed community spirit was timeless. Marcus had not just survived the HOA's tyranny, he had reshaped the neighborhood, proving that truth, persistence, and courage could never be silenced.